Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm here today with Rob Henderson. We are doing White Lotus. We said we would come back if, before the finale, if and only if there was a lot of things to talk about. There were. I think the last 2 weeks have not disappointed us. Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I think after last week's shocking, there were a couple of shocking scenes there. This most recent episode, it was still good. Kind of seeing the aftershocks of what happened last week. But yeah, I mean, after last week's episode, I was like, oh man, this would have been, that would have been the right time to follow up because we'd had so many different speculations about where the show was going, the sort of undercurrents of incest. I had predicted that it wasn't really it wasn't going anywhere. It was kind of alluding to it to kind of mess with the audience a little bit. But no, it ended up taking a very kind of a twist in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know how much it is. We just saw them kiss last week. We saw the two brothers.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
there's
We
a
didn't see the extent of
spoiler
it.
here.
That's true.
Yeah, we had, it was still a mystery, and then I like the way they brought it along in this episode because you wake up and they're next to each other, naked on a bed, and you're like, did they have butt sex? Like, did they do the full gayness? And you're wondering because you don't
That would
know.
have been a
And
lot.
Saxon, that would have been a lot. That would have been a lot to
I
do.
mean, for a first, well, I don't know. We don't know. I guess with Loki, we don't know how far he's taken things in the past. I guess.
Yeah, and Saxon wakes up and he looks at Loki's like naked bottom next to him, like slightly covered up, and I'm like, oh,
Reversal.
they were really doing something. Why is it a reversal? Loki should have been at the bottom. That would have
No,
been
no, no, no.
appropriate.
Because a few episodes ago we saw Loki staring at Saxon's butt,
Oh yeah,
and this
that's true.
time
That's
we're
true.
seeing the reverse. So the tables have turned. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and this
Eh,
time we kind of. Yeah, both times it was a little ambiguous. The first time with Loki, it was like, what's he thinking about? Why is he staring at his brother that way? This time, it's kind of the same. We're also wondering, like, how much does Saxon know about what happened? It's still this strange, ambiguous scene.
yeah. Right at the beginning, and then we gradually he finds out. Right, they tell him, and you don't know when the Chloe and uh, Chelsea tell him. I think they might be screwing with him, or they might be joking. We don't know for sure. But they tell him, and then he like freaks out, and then we see Loki in the monastery, and he remembers it there. Like it comes back to him. He's trying to accept his thoughts, and it comes back to him. And it's interesting in both the gay things, both the incest things they did. Loki was the instigator. So if you go back to the kiss, Loki like goes over to
Yeah,
him and kisses him, and then in this one, like to jack someone off, you have the one person's the instigator of that, right? It looked like Loki reached over and did it, and then Saxon kind of went along with it. So in each of these cases,
yeah.
it's Loki who's the instigator.
Which is an interesting kind of reversal from the way we've been set up in this show, right? Like the show sets us up to think Saxon is this swaggering alpha male playboy, super good looking, great shape, and he's taking his little brother under his wing and saying, let's go party, let's go hook up with these girls, let's drink, let's go have a good time. We got to get you laid, and he's the one who's kind of encouraging Loki to be this. I mean, predator is probably overstating things, but just to be more assertive and aggressive, and in a way like he's basically his own advice is being used against him, because Loki did become more aggressive and
Hmm.
more calculating and strategic, but he was using those ideas not on how to get a girl or to sleep with Chloe or Chelsea. Instead, he used those principles on his own brother, encouraging his brother to take the drugs and to you know to make out and all this stuff. So yeah, it's interesting where I think in a way it's almost, you could almost see this as the reversal of, or at least a variation of toxic masculinity, right? Because I think in the first few episodes you think, oh, Saxon is promoting toxic masculinity. He's this, finance bro who's, whatever, like talking about getting laid and hooking up and watching porn and all this stuff. and Loki is just this innocent, naive boy who may be becoming corrupted by his older brother, but instead, actually, Loki is the conniving, sneaky one, and Saxon is the one who's a little innocent. And he's like, I don't do drugs, I don't do anything. And the first time he does the drug, his own brother ends up exploiting him.
So yeah, so is it calculating because it comes back to Loki when he's in the monastery? It must be very subconscious if it is, because he is in the monastery and he's shocked when it comes back to him. So Loki is not. He's not like, yeah, I'm gonna go screw my brother. It's more like the inhibitions come down when he's drunk and on drugs, and that seems to
I
be a bit
don't
what happened.
I don't think that was what that scene was. So you're talking about when Loki and his sister Piper are both in the monastery, and the monk is telling them, whatever, let the thoughts come, and he suddenly reverts. His memories surface of him making out with his brother and jacking him off or whatever. I don't think he was thinking like, oh, suddenly he recalled what he had done. I think he's just like feeling a bit of guilt, a bit of shame. He's feeling a bit awkward or ambivalent about it. I don't think he's like the earlier in the scene where like his brother comes out and was like, all hungover, and Loki is like, I don't remember anything from last night. I thought we were meant to understand that that wasn't how he was actually feeling. Like he actually did remember, and he was just sort of gauging his brother's reaction. So you think Loki didn't actually remember what he had done?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I take it at
Oh.
face value. They say they blocked out because they blacked out because Sax said it comes back to him gradually. Like he's sitting there and he's imagining himself. So at first we think he's masturbating to his brother having sex. So I think that's why he was sort of freaked out, because that was bad enough. And then he's
Yeah.
genuinely surprised. So Saxon was blacked out, and then Loki said he was blacked out too. And then yeah, I thought that later, like the thoughts came to him. He was surprised. He remembered it. I don't know. Like, what you think he was pretending to have
Yeah.
blacked
I,
out?
I think it's like, remember the scene where Saxon is by the pool with Chelsea, and Chelsea was and Chloe, and they're like revealing to him everything that he had done, and then Chelsea is like, I don't think any drug could get me to have sex with my brother. And I think like that was basically a clue. We're like, it's plausible that if you're really messed up on drugs, that you could passively allow your own brother to jack you off. I guess maybe, but like I don't think any drug is going to get you to like actually like do something like that without any conscious intent or calculation, and then forget about it after. I think like you're
Well,
right that it lowered Loki's inhibition and willingness. Like he wouldn't have done that stone cold sober, but he was planning it and he was hoping that that's how the night would go. And I think he does
oh.
remember, but maybe he feels a little weird about it after the fact. That's my
So you
interpretation.
think so he was hiding the whole, like he was doing this calculating thing the whole time, and then he goes to the monastery, and then suddenly the thought that shocks him is like, wow, like he was so good at acting and like planning that he's like, wow, that was bad to commit incest like suddenly, and that's why he's kind of
I don't think it's
kind of
that. I think
surprised.
it's more so just like him feeling a little weird and guilty about it. Like now that he's
But
in
that's
this
not
sort of
his.
serene spiritual space, and the monk is like, let the thoughts come to you, and he's thinking about, this debaucherous night he had, and he's like just feeling a little like, oh, icky about it.
But that's it's not really consistent with like who he is, like his entire persona. His entire persona is like he's kind of this passive guy. He's stuck in the middle. Like he would have to be a great actor to like. First of all, he's got to be cunning, and he's got to like plan this out with Saxon to victimize him like this, and then he's got to like act the next morning, tell Saxon he doesn't remember, and then like try to act normal with Saxon, right? And then he's like, so like he's just contrary to his character, but he's just like pulled it off smoothly. And then suddenly when he goes to the monastery, he's like, oh my god, like what happened? It's just simpler to like he actually just his inhibitions were
I
down,
don't
he
think he's
blocked
thinking, oh my
out.
God, what happened? I think he's just like, oh God, like I really did that, and
But he
I
didn't
don't feel
care
great
until
about it
that
in
point. Like he,
hindsight.
he didn't think but he had no guilt about it. He didn't care before he was into planning this and like doing it, and then just like because he was with
Well,
the
I think it's
monks, he
one
was
thing to like
suddenly.
fantasize about it and to plan it out, and then to get drunk and get, well,
But he
we don't know
wasn't
if he did
freaked
the
out.
drug
But he wasn't
too.
freaked out the next morning. Why wasn't he freaked out the next morning when they were like talking and he was going through the day? It was just like normal, and then he
Well, I think
changes
he
at
was
the
trying to
monastery.
like suppress the thoughts because he's trying to convince Saxon that he wasn't planning it. And I think like the way to do that is for you yourself to not think about it or dwell on it.
Mm.
and to basically act innocent yourself. And we didn't talk after the end of episode 5, the actual episode where they do the drugs and make out, where there's that scene, and I rewatched that part of the episode the other day, when like it's Lockie and the two girls, Chelsea and Chloe, are like convincing Saxon, or cheering him, urging him to take the drug. I don't know what it was, like MDMA or something, but they're like, do it. And then Lockie takes it. But then as they're walking away, like as they're walking together, you see Lockie spit out the pill. Like he actually like
Oh,
pops
really?
it in his mouth, takes a swig of the beer, and like very brazen about it in front of Saxon to look all tough or whatever. And then they all convince Saxon to take it. And then as they're walking away, you see Lockie spit it out. And so I think like that more than anything is an indicator that he was like
Oh,
planning that night to go in a certain way. But I think like people are complicated. I don't think Lockie is like this super advanced Machiavellian manipulator. I think he was like trying to like do something, and then he did it, and now he feels like maybe I shouldn't have done that. Like, it's one thing to think about it and fantasize about it and then to do it, but then to actually like dwell on it and realize, oh, like, and then he saw his brother, right? Like the next morning, all hungover and full of like weird remorse and shame, and like, and it's like, oh, maybe I like he basically saw like his own brother who he had kind of exploited, and what that did to him, and he's like, maybe I shouldn't have done that to my own brother.
yeah, that's very interesting on the drug thing. Okay,
Yeah.
either did not see that or I forgot it. Okay, so that's a good kind of indicator that he's more calculating than I thought. So he was getting Saxon more messed up than he was. That's very interesting. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What a weird plan. Like, I don't know. I'm not gay, but like, I'm gonna like my plan is to jack someone off. Like, is that like a pleasurable thing for homosexuals? Like, he does. It's not like you would
Well,
maybe want
okay.
someone to do something to you. Why is he? Is this a? It's a psychological thing, right? That's not physically pleasurable to anyone.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it is. Like if you're like, I don't know, like if you're weirdly gay or you're attracted to your sibling or something, right? Because like I mean, like I guess like the
Does
the
anyone like?
equivalent for like jacking someone off. Well, I think the equivalent, and maybe it's not perfectly analogous here, but for me the equivalent would be if you're a heterosexual male, basically like fingering a girl, right? Like it is kind of exciting to do that. And if you're a gay
Yeah,
man,
it's
jacking off another man might be the like equally exciting for you.
yeah, maybe it's like usually exciting as a prelude to something else. It's usually not a goal in and of itself. Um,
Yeah, but
and
Lockie's
with the
also
girl,
young, and like maybe he did want to go farther, but I don't know. Like making out and jacking someone off is pretty advanced for a high school senior.
yeah, okay, yeah. It's a strange goal, but like, yeah. What other goals? I mean, it was the easiest goal to accomplish because he went for the easy goal, right? Because Saxon was already, I guess, masturbating, and then he like reached over and like helped him. I guess so. It was like the opportunity that kind of that showed itself. Um,
Yeah, I think that's
yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
and so
and
like,
so I think like it was like a matter of like convenience and timing. I think it was like very well played out. And you know what it reminds me of? I spoke with back when I was still doing my book tour stuff, or like the media thing. I spoke with Dan Savage. Are you familiar with Dan Savage?
yeah.
He's like a columnist, podcaster guy. He's been around since like the 90s. But I remember there was this column with Dan Savage. He's a gay male, and back in the day he used to be a lot more edgy, and
Mm,
this person wrote to him, I think it was a teenager, who said like, I have a crush on what was it? It was a girl who was basically God, how did it go? I have a crush on this other girl. It's my friend who's a male, but I have a crush on his girlfriend. What do I do?
mm.
And Dan Savage's advice was to basically get everyone drunk, get them to make out with each other first, and then start to make out with the boy first, and then make out with the girl. And it was like this very sort of scheming thing of like,
Was
I
this
want to
person
get to
boy?
my
Was this
friend's
person
girlfriend.
male or female? The person asking for advice.
If I'm not mistaken, it was a girl who wrote him
Uh,
who had a male friend. So she was
okay.
basically a lesbian with a male friend, but really wanted to make out with this guy's girlfriend. And
Uh-huh.
Dan Savage's advice was like, you gotta like go to a tailgate party, get everyone messed up, start making out with the boy first, or get them to make out with each other first, then make out with the boy, then make out with the girl. And I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, this is like very conniving, but like, that's basically what kind of Locky did. He kind of got like encouraged his brother to get messed up. Other people started making out, and then he, kind of escalated from there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering how consistent all this just is with Loki's personality, right? So it's like, okay, so that's what the show's doing. It's like, oh, you thought things were one way, but like he's actually something else. But like the question is like, how does it make sense? Right. And so it's like he's
Yeah.
this guy who everyone in his family thinks is kind of passive. He sits there, he doesn't know whether he wants to go to Duke or UNC, he doesn't know if he wants to hang out with his brother or sister, right? But the one thing he's focused on, the one thing he knows for sure, is he wants sexual relations with his brother. Nothing, everything else in life is uncertain. But that's the one
I mean,
thing
I
where
guess
he turns into like,
the breadcrumbs have kind of been dropped, right? Like there was the scene where he's staring at Saxon, his naked butt, and like other, he's kind of like, he spends a lot of time with his brother. It's and then like all of the weird like incest undertones throughout the series so far, like the dad Tim exposing himself in his like bathrobe when he's hopped up on lorazepam. And I think there's the show setting is, I think there's going to be one more weird incestuous thing, and this could be a total reach. But there was that scene where Tim, the father, is in the hotel room, and Saxon is walking into the room, and his father Tim says something like, "Oh," he said something like, I need to find what was it, Locker and Pipeline," and he gets the names mixed up, because then Saxon responds like, "What are you talking about, Locker and Pipeline?" And that's because Tim is like, sleep deprived and drugged up and whatever. But I think that conflation of the names is meant to indicate that like basically Locky and Piper, like they're gonna do something together, or something weird is gonna happen with those two at this monastery, that they're spending the night alone together. So I don't think we're done yet with this weird incest tone or like theme.
maybe. I mean, so what Sophie told me was that she thought that there was like a three-way thing where Piper wanted Loki, Loki wanted Saxon, and Saxon wanted Piper. So everybody wanted someone else. Um, and so
Oh,
in
yeah,
this
yeah,
case,
yeah.
Loki would,
Interesting.
Piper would be the instigator, and then somehow to close the triangle, we're gonna need sex. We're gonna need Saxon and Piper to do something. So maybe we'll get the
Yeah.
payoff. We'll get all three.
I don't think. Well, I mean, like this show is so like unpredictable, but there was that scene in episode 5 where Saxon and Loki are on the boat, and I don't know. Saxon is kind of, he's teasing his brother, and Loki responds by saying something, "I'm going to get you," or something like that, or "I'm going to get back at you." And I think Loki knows Saxon kind of has this weird crush on Piper. And so Loki's, he's getting back at his brother first by like doing this weird gay stuff with him. But then also, if he gets to do something with Piper, then he really gets one over on his brother. And so I think he's like, there's this weird sibling rivalry jealousy thing where he's like, you know, sort of dominating him sexually, both by like making out with him and jacking him off, but then also like getting the sister that Saxon wanted. He's a
Yeah,
sneaky,
yeah.
he's the sneaky effer.
What did he say? Why did he say, "I'm going to get back to you"? What was it in response to?
I think Saxon was just basically saying, oh, you called him a virgin, or basically just like kind of mocking him for his innocence. And because he's been gently ribbing his brother the whole time about like, oh, you need to drink protein shakes and get big and be more aggressive and all this. And Loki, his body language is always very meek when he's around
Hmm.
Saxon, but I think he's like, this is how I can get back at him.
By the way, this is a little bit off, but people are going to be interested in this. Did you listen to? Were you listening to part of the Andrew Sullivan Mike White interview?
I read some of the transcript or the description, but I didn't get to listen to it.
So did you read the part about his story of his dad?
I don't recall what happened there.
Okay, you'd recall this, I think, if you read it. So, his dad, he grew up around Pasadena. His dad was this guy who ghost wrote books for like evangelical Christian leaders, like Jerry Falwell
Okay.
types, in the 1980s. And then it turned out his dad was gay, right? and then his
Mike White's
dad became
dad.
and his yeah, Mike White's
Oh,
dad turned out
okay.
to be
Yeah.
gay, and then became
Okay.
like a gay activist. So it's funny. It's like this evangelical guy that becomes like a gay activist. It's a kind of like a very kind of White Lotus uh, kind of twist. So that was just very funny. Yeah, the interview is like 45 minutes. Is the first 45 minutes is free, and then it's paywall after that. But anyways, we could go back to that or not if we want. Yeah. What did you think about when they had that opening scene? I almost think this is cheap when they had the opening scene where he shoots himself, and then Victoria and Piper are like, "Oh my god!" I'm like, "Oh no, it was just a fantasy."
Yeah, I didn't like it either, but I guess hmm. I guess it was meant to be like more shocking in a way. Like it depends on what he's trying to do, but I think like because remember later in the episode you see Tim talking to Victoria, his wife, and
Yeah.
his wife is like, I don't think I could live if we didn't have all of this. Like I don't have it in me. And then like the later scene, you see Tim holding a gun and shooting her, basically like, okay, well if you can't live without the money, then I'm gonna have to kill you. And that was a shocking scene too. And so I think like the show is we
But you
needed
don't get
this to
fooled
open with
twice. I
that
think that
scene.
the second
Yeah.
time you don't get fooled. The second time you know probably a dream.
Which is maybe what they wanted, right? Like, because if we only saw that scene, then we would actually be like truly horrified. But because we had that opening scene, we're like, all right, this is just Tim's, imagination getting carried away again. But yeah, it is a little cheap. Like, it was like a shocking opening scene. I don't know if that was necessary. Um, but yeah, it also like it did like sort of it was a shocking enough opener that like for the rest of the episode I was a little bit more tense I think than I otherwise would have been. So if that was the goal, then it was effective.
Yeah. So I guess we could talk about Tim. I always thought he was going to end up a Buddhist somehow. And he's taken in by this, because he's at the end of the last episode. He's praying to Jesus, right? So he's like, God, just tell me what to
Mm.
do. So you see he's like getting into spirituality, trying to look for something, right? And then they go to this monastery, and then you're like, he's taken in. So I don't know. I think somehow he ends up never going back to the States and just hiding out in the monastery or something. I think something like that could happen, right?
I was thinking that too. I mean, it was interesting. Like for a moment I thought the monk was actually trying to not trying, but like the effect would have been he was convincing Tim to commit suicide because the monk is like,
Yeah.
we all just return back to the ocean. You
Yeah.
can't outrun pain. And Tim was like, oh, okay. And I think in his mind, he was basically getting permission to kill himself because, it's going to be painless and you just return back to the earth or whatever. But then, there is like, you could argue there's like this, supernatural element in the series where Guy Talk, he like scours the room and then he, finally he opens the one drawer out of the many drawers in that dresser and finds the gun immediately just before Tim and Victoria arrive.
So
So I think like, you could argue that, basically Tim, his plans were foiled. Like there is like this element of karma or something, like basically God or Buddha or the universe doesn't want Tim to kill himself and acted through Guy Talk.
so that's interesting. So yeah, it's interesting that he pulls it out. The first thing you could go through all of those drawers, but he goes through the one. But I think about it now, and like imagine you're approaching it, and you just open the first one closest to your right hand. It's like on the right side. It's like low.
Yeah.
That just might be the natural place that you grab, right? So Tim puts it in there because that's natural, and then Guy Talk that just happens to be the first place he
Oh, that's
searches.
interesting. Yeah.
That seems to be yeah. I thought that's a very kind of it's clever. I mean, it's clever to do that because like, would you go and search like in order, or would you just go like the closest one in reach? And that's why Tim would put it in there, and maybe you would just go to the first one in reach, and Guy Talk would just find it, right? Um,
Yeah.
it's like the
Yeah.
height of
That
your
is
hand.
interesting. There are so many different levels to that because I would almost think like if I were Tim, I would hide it like in the least likely drawer, like the bottom left or something.
But he's
But
going crazy, right?
if you're
He's
yeah,
out
he's
of his
going
mind.
crazy and he's just trying to hide the gun as quick as possible. And then Guy Talk is also just trying to find the gun as quickly as possible. So he opens the most convenient drawer. And there was that funny like there was that scene. I mean, it was like a subtle commentary where Guy Talk after he gets the gun and he's exiting the room and he walks past Tim and Victoria, and he's all nervous and he's like looking out of the corner of his eye, worried that they like are going to know he did something, but they're totally like ignoring him. They're like, oh, he's just the help. Like he's not even, he's just a part of the furniture or the background scenery. And so it is, that was one of those funny scenes. But then, yeah, I think like that was an interesting reversal because last time you and I spoke, we were like, oh, Guy Talk is screwed. Like the gun is stolen. Like his whole career is over. And now it seems like he's actually back in the game. You also see him at the shooting range and he's actually pretty good with the gun. So I think like he and, what's her name? Mook. There may actually be a future for them.
Yeah, I mean, Mook didn't appear much. I mean, she was just there for a few seconds to look forward to seeing Guy Talk. So, like, he's winning her over. The dynamics of this relationship changed. I thought that at the beginning that he was like, in friend zone, no chance.